You ever have one of those moments where you just know someone's about to do something stupid, and you're gonna be the one who has to clean up the mess? Yeah. That was me the day Karen Whitmore, HOA board president of Seabreeze Bluffs, decided my seawall was aesthetically offensive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jonathan Brooks," she said, drawing out every syllable like she was reading a court sentence, "but your structure is obstructing the coastal view for several of our homeowners. It violates Article 12, Section 3, Visual Harmony and Oceanfront Uniformity." I blinked at her, stunned. "It's a seawall, Karen. It's been here since '87. It's the only reason my property hasn't turned into beachfront soup." She pursed her lips, clipboard hugged to her chest like a life raft. "We voted. The HOA has decided it must come down." "You voted," I said, stepping down from my porch. "You mean you and your little cocktail crew decided over Chardonnay and shrimp cocktail?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's inappropriate." I glanced past her at the other board members standing awkwardly behind her on the street. None of them met my gaze. Cowards. Karen always ran the show and no one had a spine to challenge her. "Try me," I said. "I've got the permits. I've got the engineer's report. That wall's legal and necessary." Karen gave me a tight smile. "Then I suggest you contact your attorney, Mr. Brooks. Because demolition begins next Friday." I actually laughed, thinking she couldn't be serious. But sure enough, 7 days later, a crew showed up. Without warning. Without so much as a knock, they began tearing into the concrete with jackhammers and a backhoe while I was at work. By the time I got home, half of it was already gone. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running down the hill to the back of my property. "This is private property. You're trespassing." The foreman, a guy who clearly didn't want to be there, just shrugged. "HOA said it was their jurisdiction, sent us the work order and everything." I grabbed my phone and started taking video. "You touch 1 more inch of that wall and you'll be liable. That's a retaining structure. You damage my foundation and I'll bury you in lawsuits." They packed up fast, muttering apologies. But the damage was done. More than half the wall was gone, exposing the soft bluff underneath. Karen strutted over later that evening, wearing a smug grin and a wide-brimmed sun hat like she was headed to a yacht party. "See, doesn't that look better already?" she said, motioning to the open view. "This is a premium neighborhood, Jonathan. Our property values depend on views like this. You just compromised the entire stability of this slope," I said, pointing at the raw earth now exposed to the tide. "You're going to regret this." She waved me off. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic. It's not like the ocean's coming for us. Funny thing about the sea, it doesn't care about HOA votes, and it sure as hell doesn't care about sun hats." I didn't sleep much that night. The wind came in hard off the water, howling through the gaps where the seawall used to be. My bedroom windows rattled like they were remembering storms past. I stood out on my deck until nearly midnight, watching the tide creep closer. Every swell clawed at the exposed earth below like it knew something I didn't. The next morning, I was already on the phone with the city's coastal engineering division before the sun climbed over the bluff. I sent over the footage I'd taken. They didn't sound thrilled. By noon, a city inspector named Morales arrived in a battered white truck. He had a clipboard, a laser rangefinder, and a look on his face like someone had told him he was standing on a time bomb. "This wall was a load-bearing structure," Morales said after walking the property line. "You remove something like that without a replacement plan in place, you're asking for slope failure." "They didn't just remove it," I said. "They did it without any geotechnical review, no permits, no soil reinforcement." He gave me a long look. "That's not just reckless. That's criminal negligence." I followed him as he crouched near the edge of the bluff. His laser pinged off the ground, measuring erosion depth. He frowned and adjusted his reading. "Only took 24 hours for the bluff to start receding," he muttered. "I'll be filing an emergency report with the city. If that slope slips, it won't stop with your property." "Because downhill," I said, pointing, "is the Whitmore estate." He paused. "The HOA president?" Yeah, I said. Her infinity pool's about 20 feet from where the drop-off starts. He didn't say anything to that, just started scribbling like his life depended on it. 2 days later, I got the call. A geotechnical team had been dispatched. The city had opened an investigation into unpermitted construction and unauthorized demolition on private land. A cease and desist had gone out to the HOA. I thought that would be the end of it, or at least a pause. It wasn't. Instead of backing off, Karen doubled down. I came home Thursday evening to find a glossy flyer stuffed in every mailbox on the street. Bold red letters screamed about Mr. Brooks' non-compliant structures and obstruction of community progress. It was a smear campaign, complete with a low-angle photo of my property that made it look like I was hoarding sandbags and hurricane shutters. I knocked on my neighbor Leo's door across the street. He worked third shift at the shipyard and didn't have time for drama. He held up the flyer before I could say anything. "She's losing it," he said. Tried to get me to sign some petition about reclaiming HOA authority. I told her I'd rather sign a disconnection notice. "She still think this is about the view. She's pushing some nonsense about environmental beautification now," he said. Says she's working with a landscape architect to reimagine the bluff line. I stared at him. "She's trying to build something. Sounds like an amphitheater," he said, but I stopped listening after she said coastal harmony. That night, I installed 3 motion-triggered cameras facing the bluff. The next morning, I checked the footage. Around 2 a.m., 2 men with flashlights had crept across the rear property line and staked a series of short plastic flags into the soil. I zoomed in on the van they arrived in. It had a decal on the back, Coastal Dreams Design Group. I ran the name through the state contractor database. They were unlicensed. The next call I made was to my attorney, Marlene Ortiz. She wasn't just sharp, she'd cut her teeth prosecuting environmental violations for the state before going private. I didn't have to explain much. "They're trespassing, they're tampering with a known hazardous slope, and they're impersonating licensed contractors," she said after reviewing the video. "We're going to file for an injunction, and we're pressing charges." That was Friday. Saturday morning, the bluff gave out. I was pouring coffee when the deck shuttered. I ran outside and saw at the slope where the seawall had been collapsed in a V-shaped scar, raw earth sloughing off into the surf. The erosion had undercut the nearby drainage pipe, which snapped like a twig, water blasting out of it like a fire hose. And just beyond that, Karen's backyard was tilting, her glass railing buckled. One corner of the infinity pool cracked, spilling a slick of chlorinated water down the hill. By the time emergency services arrived, her entire lower patio had broken off and crashed into what used to be my retaining wall. She came running down the street barefoot, robe flapping, phone in one hand. She didn't even look at me. "They said it was stable," she shouted at a fireman. "They said the slope was fine." The fireman didn't answer. He was too busy directing the crew around a sinkhole that had opened near the sidewalk. City engineers cordoned off the entire bluff that afternoon. 6 homes were red-tagged, including Karen's. No one was allowed back inside until a full geotechnical assessment could be completed. The local news ran a story that night. "Luxury homes at risk after HOA removes protective seawall." Footage showed the jagged cliffside, broken decks dangling like snapped limbs. My video of the demolition crew made the cut, along with the time-stamped footage of the mystery landscapers. The city press office confirmed the HOA had not filed any permits for demolition or landscaping. Investigations were underway. Civil penalties were likely. Criminal charges were possible. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because the next day, I got a letter from the HOA's attorney and attempt to shift blame. They claimed I had neglected to disclose critical structural dependencies when I purchased the property, and that I was complicit in the misrepresentation of shared infrastructure. I brought the letter to Marlene. "They're trying to say the wall was a shared asset," she said, eyes scanning the text. "That's laughable. Your property deeds are crystal clear, the wall was yours and you maintained it. This is a bluff, they're hoping you'll settle out of court. I didn't. Instead, we filed a lawsuit. Private property trespass, unlawful demolition, endangerment, fraudulent misrepresentation. And because the HOA had used community funds to pay for the demolition, misappropriation of member dues, but the real nail came from the insurance companies. Adjusters reviewing the damage to the red-tagged homes found that no risk assessments had been filed, no slope stability reports, no engineering sign-off. And since the HOA had ordered the work, the liability fell squarely on them, premiums skyrocketed, claims were denied. And suddenly, the board members who'd stood behind Karen that day on the street weren't so loyal anymore. One by one, they resigned. By the end of the week, Karen was the only one left, and she was facing a subpoena. The subpoena landed like a hammer. Karen Whitmore stood on her driveway as it was delivered by a county official in a windbreaker and mirrored sunglasses. The look she gave him wasn't indignation, it was disbelief. Like she couldn't comprehend that someone in her position could be touched by something as mundane as legal process. I watched from my porch across the street, arms crossed. She didn't look up. By the following Tuesday, the city council held an emergency hearing downtown. The chamber was packed reporters, homeowners, engineers, even some real estate investors who'd caught wind of the growing disaster. I wore a navy button-down and brought a 3-ring binder filled with documentation. Marlene walked beside me, calm and methodical, carrying her own stack of exhibits. Karen arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in a cream blouse and dark slacks, flanked by a new attorney I hadn't seen before. He looked too young to shave and too nervous to sleep. The hearing opened with testimony from the city's geotechnical analyst, a soft-spoken man named Doyle who spoke like he'd rather be back in the field. When the seawall was removed, Doyle said, the bluff's load-bearing integrity was compromised within 48 hours. The soil composition in that region is highly susceptible to erosion. It wasn't a matter of if the slope would collapse, it was when. Councilwoman Nadeem leaned forward. And had the HOA consulted with your office prior to demolition? No, Doyle said. There was no consultation, no permit request, and no geotechnical review submitted. Karen's lawyer rose. My client acted on the information provided to her by contracted professionals, who were operating without a license, interrupted Councilman Velez, holding up a copy of the state contractor registry. According to the Department of Consumer Affairs, Coastal Dreams Design Group has no permits, no engineering credentials, and no record of prior work in this county. The room buzzed. Karen shifted in her seat for the first time. The next speaker was an older woman with a cane and a folder full of photos. Her name was Mrs. Dalka. She lived 3 doors down from me. A widow, former elementary school principal, and proud owner of a garden that had now vanished into the Pacific. This bluff gave way not because of storms or age, she said, voice steady despite her trembling hands. It gave way because a group of people decided their ocean view was more important than our safety. She held up a photo of her yard, now nothing but broken fencing and a sheer drop. I lost my garden, but someone else could have lost a child. You don't play with nature like this. The gallery went quiet. Then came Marlene. She laid out timelines, invoices, footage, and legal precedent like she was building a wall of her own, one that the HOA couldn't climb over or dig under. She highlighted the misappropriation of funds, the falsified contractor credentials, and the unauthorized destruction of a structural barrier. When she handed over the footage from my security cameras, the one showing the landscapers sneaking onto my property in the dead of night, someone in the gallery actually gasped. Then came the most damning piece. The payment to Coastal Dreams, Marlene said, clicking a slide on the projector, was routed through a private account under the name of one of the HOA board members. Not a corporate account, not an HOA trust, a personal routing number. She clicked again. A screenshot of the bank transaction appeared. Dated 3 days before the wall was torn down, the council fell silent. Even Karen's lawyer didn't stand to object. Councilwoman Nadim finally turned to the city clerk. "Is the district attorney's office aware of this?" "They are now," the clerk said, making a note. Within 72 hours, 2 former board members were taken in for questioning. One of them, a man named Greg Fulton, folded almost immediately. He'd been covering his mortgage with siphoned HOA funds for nearly a year. The payments to the fake landscaping firm were part of his scheme masked as a beautification campaign to justify the expense. But Karen hadn't just approved it, she'd initiated it. The emails were recovered from a private server when she hadn't wiped carefully enough. Marlene handed over a printed chain showing Karen authorizing the demolition of my seawall and greenlighting the coastal revitalization project. It was all there. She even used the phrase "force the bluff to yield." The DA's office didn't wait for trial. An arrest warrant was issued citing criminal negligence, conspiracy to defraud, and reckless endangerment. News vans rolled into the neighborhood like a parade. Karen was taken into custody without ceremony. Her house, already condemned, stood like an empty monument to arrogance. Neighbors milled outside their homes, watching her being led away in cuffs. No one cheered, no one jeered. Just silence, the kind that settles in after the wind has finished tearing through. But the fallout wasn't over. The insurance companies, already fuming over the denied claims, launched separate civil suits. Home values plummeted, and several residents filed class actions against the HOA. The association's emergency fund was drained in weeks. Legal defense fees, property repairs, and restitution payments buried what was left of their coffers. At a special meeting held in the local library's community room, a new board was elected. No speeches, just ballots. People didn't want promises anymore, they wanted accountability. I was nominated but declined. I didn't need the title. I had my wall rebuilt, this time reinforced with concrete pylons and steel mesh. The city not only approved it, they offered a grant to assist with construction, citing its importance as a stabilizing structure. Mrs. Dalka planted a new garden. Raised beds this time, lined with driftwood and native herbs. Leo from across the street offered to help me repaint the side of my house. Said it was the least he could do, considering I'd saved the neighborhood from becoming a cautionary tale, but the real closure came in spring. A group of college students from the local environmental sciences department came to study the bluff restoration. They brought drones, seismographs, and curiosity. One of them asked me how it started. I pointed at the edge of the property where the grass met the new seawall. It started when someone thought the view was more important than the ground beneath it. He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did, because that was the thing about the ocean. It gave and it took. And if you tried to cheat it, if you thought paper votes and fake contractors could bend it to your will, it would take back everything. Even the illusion of control. 3 months after the collapse, you could still see where the bluff had sheared away like a mouth missing teeth. The city had fenced the area off with tall steel barriers, posted restricted zone signs every 10 feet, and installed motion sensors that chirped if a bird so much as landed nearby. Despite the visual scar, the neighborhood had settled into something unfamiliar: quiet accountability. The new HOA board operated more like a town hall: open meetings, transparent budgeting, and actual votes. No more wine-soaked decisions made behind garden walls. Most residents were still wary, but the fear had shifted. It wasn't about fines or citations anymore, it was about liability. One afternoon, I met with a detective named Rourke from the Financial Crimes Division. He wore a worn leather satchel and kept tapping his pen against his notepad like he was ticking off invisible boxes. "We've traced the HOA's misused funds across 3 private accounts," he said while standing at the edge of the stabilized bluff. "One of them was used to cover the down payment on a cabin in Mammoth Lakes, another paid off a Tesla lease, and the third." That one's the most interesting. He handed me a printed list of transactions, dozens of them, each less than $500, all spaced days apart. Karen was funneling money to someone under the radar, he said. Name's Philip Creighton, ever heard of him? No, I said, scanning the name. Should I have? He's a developer. Used to be a city planner in Santa Clarita. Got booted for manipulating zoning permits. What was he doing here? Rourke knelt and pointed to the far end of the bluff, just beyond the condemned Whitmore property. There was a proposal submitted under a shell company, Bluffline Horizons, LLC. They wanted to build a 3-unit luxury rental with integrated shoreline access. No public announcement, no environmental review, just a quiet filing and a couple of greased palms. My stomach tightened. Karen was trying to force me out. That wall was the only thing keeping my land stable. Rourke nodded. If your property collapsed, it would have triggered a reassessment. The city could have claimed it was uninhabitable, and the HOA could have made a case for eminent domain under community protection clauses. She wanted to devalue my home deliberately. And she wasn't working alone, he said, standing up. We've got enough for a conspiracy charge. The DA's expanding the case. That evening, I called Marlene and filled her in. She was already several steps ahead. I got a call from a former board treasurer, she said. He's offering full cooperation in exchange for immunity. Apparently, Karen was planning on selling the bluff as a common green space once the slope gave way. She even had a buyer lined up. Guess who? Creighton. Bingo, and get this, she'd already drafted a community vote packet, backdated of course. She was going to fake approval to make it look like the residents had authorized the sale. She was going to sell our land right out from under us. Not anymore, Marlene said. The DA's office is preparing racketeering charges. The news broke 2 days later. A joint task force had arrested Philip Creighton in Los Angeles after a sting operation revealed he'd been offering under-the-table payouts to HOA officials across the state in exchange for access to coastal properties. Karen's name was on 2 of the signed agreements. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of public funds, unlawful demolition, and attempted real estate fraud. The racketeering charge came with it, slapping on a potential 20-year sentence. The trial was swift. Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity due to stress, but the evidence spoke loud enough to drown him out. Emails, bank records, the signed agreements with Creighton, and the drone footage of her newly planned community wellness pavilion that just so happened to overlap my property line. I testified on the 3rd day. Karen didn't care about the view, I said calmly, pointing to the photos of the collapsed bluff. She cared about the sale. My seawall was an obstacle, so she removed it without cause, without consent, and without a plan. And now, half this neighborhood is uninhabitable because of it. The jury took less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 14 years with no chance of parole for at least 10. The courtroom was packed with homeowners from the neighborhood. No one clapped, no one cried. It was a quiet kind of justice, the kind that comes after a storm flattens a house, and you walk away grateful to still be standing. With Karen gone and the old board dissolved, the neighborhood began to rebuild, not just structurally, but socially. People who hadn't spoken in years started working together. We organized a bluff restoration committee, partnered with the university's environmental program, and secured state funding for native planting and erosion control. The new seawall held firm, reinforced and re-engineered with enough redundancy to withstand a decade of storms. Mrs. Dalka's garden bloomed again, this time with a bench facing the water, donated by the community in memory of resilience. Leo and I installed solar lights along the restored pathway behind our homes. It wasn't about views anymore. It was about stewardship. The property values stabilized within 6 months. New buyers came in, drawn not by the ocean, but by the story of how the neighborhood stood up to corruption and won. The bluff became a case study in urban planning classes. The city passed new ordinances requiring HOA decisions involving infrastructure to pass independent engineering reviews. Marlene went on to consult for other neighborhoods dealing with HOA overreach. Last I heard, she was helping draft legislation for statewide HOA reform. As for me, I stayed. I kept my home, kept the bluff, kept the seawall. Every now and then, I walk to the edge and look out at the horizon not for what I might lose, but for what we managed to keep. And when the waves come crashing in, as they always do, they hit a wall that's stronger than the one before. Built not just of concrete and steel this time, but of evidence, consequence, and a neighborhood that finally remembered who it belonged to.